You are watching CNN Money Switzerland. It is Friday, the 12th of June. I'm Ana Maria Montero with your headlines tonight. Starting with global markets, they've swung this week from gains to yesterday's crushing losses driven by renewed fears over the coronavirus pandemic. Joining me now to break this down is Esti de Beck. She is head of global market strategy at Natixis Investment Managers. Thank you so much for joining us, Esti. Always a pleasure.
Hi, Ana Maria.
We've seen this huge rally, right, in global stocks since mid-March. And then, bam, the party's over. This violent correction yesterday. In fact, one of the biggest one-day losses since March. What is going on here?
I think the market needed a breather. I think we had probably run up a little too quickly, a little too far, and markets were really pricing this perfect V-shaped recovery, which we weren't going to get. And a couple of different headlines happened. In part, you got the Fed saying that the recovery was going to be very slow. And if you have rates on hold, which is a very positive for the market, but it also means the underlying economy is picking up slower than what the market was hoping for. And you need to have a bit of a period of consolidation.
I mean, does this also have to do with bulls have got worries that bulls have gotten ahead of themselves in terms of valuations being too high?
No, I don't think it's the best time to look at valuations. They're very high because the E has come down significantly, and we don't even really know how far down the E is going. We're waiting for second quarter earnings for that. So I don't think valuations is the best picture to look at, even if we're trying to be forward looking. The reality is markets tend to front run economic data, and we've probably saw the worst of it in April, and economies and activity is gradually starting to pick up since May. It's going to take time, it's going to be gradual, it's going to be staggered, but we are reopening, and that's what markets were looking towards. I think one of the aspects that actually probably supports the rally is that the consensus has remained relatively bearish, and cash levels are still very elevated. Most people missed the rally since March. Very few people on March 23rd, if you're looking at US equities, decided it was time to go back in. And so I think now a lot of these corrections are going to be seen more as opportunities to get back in at a slightly better entry point. And I'm not sure how deep they're going to be, even if we could have a few of them. And again, there is some room for consolidation.
All right, and then we look at today, for example. It seems that, at least European stocks have stabilized again. I mean, what are the odds of, how long do you think we could see this, and what are the odds of another free fall happening?
It's really tough to tell. As I said, we have second quarter data and second quarter earnings coming up. We probably have some disappointment risk remaining there. You could have a couple of these headlines. The market probably needs to consolidate. So if it recuperates quite quickly now, you could see a bit of a correction. We might not get another day like a -5, -6%, but we probably are going to enter a slightly more volatile period for the next couple of weeks. But again, that is to be expected. We are still in a crisis, or just coming out of the crisis, or trying to come out of this crisis. I think all of this is to be expected.
And now as we have countries lifting restrictions, travel restrictions, I mean, what impact could next week's opening of the borders have on the European markets? What do you think?
So far, I know fears of a second wave have come back to the fore, especially in the US, but for Europe and Asia, mostly broadly, it's been so far so good. We haven't seen a massive uptick in cases. And more importantly, I don't think cases is what we should really be looking at, because it's a function of testing in different countries. What really matters is that we stayed home to flatten the curve. We seem to have succeeded in that. And the reason we needed to flatten the curve was so it was manageable for our hospital systems, for our healthcare systems. And as long as that continues to be the case, we are going to continue to gradually reopen.
All right, so I have to ask, to finish up, what are you telling your investors?
We're not in a hurry to be aggressive. We're not trying to run after and chase this rally. We thought periods of consolidation or corrections were going to come. We don't think we're going to retest the lows, and we don't think this is the beginning of another massive correction, but we thought we would have corrections. So be patient and gradually build portfolios over the coming months for the medium term.
All right, thank you so much, Esti, for joining us as always and for your insights.
Thank you.
And in other news, among those Swiss stocks enjoying a rebound today was Nestle, after the company announced it is exploring the potential sale of its North American water business. Chief Executive Mark Schneider has been on a selling spree, shifting out categories such as ice cream and confectionery as part of its focus on more health-conscious as well as better-performing brands. The company has also come under pressure to reduce its package waste and said a sale would help to meet its sustainability targets. It expects to complete the review of its water business by early 2021. Sensor manufacturer AMS said it has joined forces with German medical device company Senova to develop a low-cost digital antibody test for coronavirus patients. The pair said trials combining AMS's sensor technology with Senova's existing testing kit were successful. They plan to roll out the electronic test for use in doctors' offices and other healthcare facilities by September this year. And Zurich Airport said it handled just over 44,000 passengers in May, a decrease of 98% compared to the same period last year due to the crisis. The company, which held its AGM today, said it was not yet possible to give guidance for traffic volumes for this year. Now, cash may still be king in Switzerland, but that looks to be changing. TWINT CEO Markus Kilb says contactless payments are soaring as corona-conscious consumers avoid hard cash. Olivia Chang has the story.
We've went from registering something like 3,000 to 4,000 new clients a day, which was already a good number, to something like 7,000 a day now. We also went from a few hundreds of new merchants that we were onboarding week by week. We are now onboarding hundreds of new merchants on a daily basis. So what we've clearly seen is a very strong demand for TWINT as a payment system for a safe, hygienic, and contactless payment that is also convenient and gives a lot of benefits to our clients beyond the obvious topic that we're currently facing in terms of contactless payments.
What is going to be the long-term changes of payment behavior? Because in Switzerland, we've heard for many years the phrase that cash is still king. What is the relevance of that statement going forward?
It is true, Switzerland is by and large a cash and debit card dominated market. Nevertheless, we've seen already trends back in 2018, 2019, where an overarching trend can be seen that customers are switching towards TWINT as the dominant mobile payment scheme in Switzerland. So we went from 10 million transactions in 18 to roughly 37 million in 2019. We'll be seeing 100 million, maybe even more in 2020. And clearly what we have seen is that the current situation has worked as an accelerator in that trend.
So with that in mind, how many new merchants or vendors do you expect to add, not only during this period, but by the end of 2020?
Just looking at parking spaces, we have 200,000 parking spaces where you can use TWINT. On top of that, we have something like 120,000 acceptance places in the physical world and tens of thousands in the e-commerce world. To be honest, it's very difficult for me to give you a prediction where we'll be at the end of the year. Our objective obviously is that we are available at all places around the clock for our customers.
Is this the sharpest growth and adoption you have seen since the start of TWINT? And how many of those are really just people who have downloaded the app but have never used it before?
Well, it's true. We are currently growing at a pace we have not seen before. Nevertheless, it is somewhat in line with the trend we have seen. So it's not just that we now just did a step change in terms of growth. We went from growth rates where we would be growing something like 1,000 clients a day back in 2018 to something like 2,000 in 2019. And we've been growing all that to where we are right now at 5,000 to 7,000 on a daily basis. And we expect that to continue. Obviously, currently we have about 2.6 million registered clients. And we see a very strong activation of these clients. I mean, we have on average, we have between 3 and 4 transactions per client per month. And that is continuing to grow. I mean, we doubled that number, more than doubled that number within the last 12 months, and we expect it to continue to grow. And we see a very, very strong activation rate on all the new clients that are onboarding now. I mean, basically, they download TWINT and immediately start using it.
I just want to go back a bit for a few months, because back then at the beginning of the year, you were involved with a dispute with Digitech Galaxis, the online retail platform, and this was over commissions. I wonder, has this changed at all your policy on commissions, and have you had any similar disagreements with other major partners?
No, it has not changed our position at all. I think we have made a very fair offer to Digitech, an offer that was accepted by a multitude of merchants. Thousands of merchants have accepted that offer. And I tell you, I mean, there are some of the merchants that we're dealing with have a very strong reputation for very hard negotiations. When you look at it, I mean, all the supermarket chains basically have very strong negotiation power towards all their suppliers and partners, and they managed to accept our offer. So we are very confident that we've made a very, very fair offer. And then we have to see how this works out in the end.
And just finally, there's been a couple of changes at the top of TWINT in terms of its executive board. Just talk to us the reasoning behind making these changes, especially during a period like coronavirus.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, TWINT has gone through a phase of strong growth, and obviously we plan to continue that growth. But we have now come to a point where we say, okay, we have to reconsider, is that the perfect setup that we have? And we came to the conclusion that we have to become even more customer-centric, less functional orientated, more customer-centric, and make sure that when we look at our main target groups, which are our issuing banks, which are our merchants and the acquiring companies that are working with these merchants, and the end user that is actually then using TWINT on a day-to-day basis, we have to look at our organization and say, okay, how do we make sure that we can address the needs and the demands of these various customer groups in a better way, but at the same time accelerate the way we can bring innovation and customer service to our clients. And that led us to come to this new organizational setup.
Already one of the sportiest nations in Europe, a new study by the Federal Sports Office reveals how the Swiss have become even more active, especially among the older generation. Our sports correspondent Matt Layton spoke to the author of the report.
Are the population in Switzerland doing more or less sport than they were 6, 12, 18 years ago?
They're definitely doing a lot more sports than 20 years ago. Okay. In 2000, when we did our first study, we found that about a third of the population said they were doing sports for 3 or more hours per week. And this share increased to over 50% in the current study of 2020.
And so what are the sports that we're doing more now and changing more?
Well, interestingly, the ranking of the top sports in Switzerland hasn't changed since 2000. It's hiking, cycling, swimming, downhill skiing and jogging that were most popular in 2000 and are still most popular. But all of these sports have increased their popularity. And particularly the one that has had the biggest boom is hiking.
We're all doing sports, we're all buying the latest kit. I understand we're spending on average about 2,000 Swiss a year. So it's bringing a lot into the economy.
Yes, that's true. If we aggregate the numbers, so we can say that the Swiss spent something between 13 and 14 billion Swiss francs a year on sport.
So that's great looking back in the last 20 years. Clearly in the last 3 months, we've had the COVID-19. Do you think this is going to make a blip on the future surveys, or is it too early to tell?
I don't think so. What we kind of noticed is that of course, a lot of sports activity stopped during the pandemic. Private gyms were closed, sport clubs were closed, but people were shifting to cycling, jogging, doing workouts at home. And I think once things start to open up again, people just return to their normal sports. Probably some people even have found that hiking is fun, so the figures might even go up again.
So how do we fit into the rest of Europe and the rest of the world as a nation?
It appears that Switzerland is one of the most sportive countries in Europe. That is to say, one of the countries with the highest percentages of people doing sports, together with a lot of the Scandinavian countries.
How will future generations remember the worldwide impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? And what will it teach them? These are the questions museums and cultural institutions around the globe consider as they work to document life in the time of coronavirus. Cyril Varnier reports.
Once bustling city streets, sitting deserted. A conversation between generations forced to stay apart. Grocery shopping dressed in a makeshift hazmat. A healthcare worker clearly exhausted on the front lines. These are some of the images that capture a pivotal time in history as museums and cultural institutions around the globe work to document the coronavirus pandemic.
It's really important that for future generations, they're able to look back and see what had to happen in order for us all to be safe. And I also think it's a useful way of processing some of the really difficult feelings and frustrations that we all experience.
In late April, historic England asked people for photos of life on lockdown in their first call for public submissions since World War II. In 1 week, they received nearly 3,000 entries from around the country, illustrating a diverse collective experience.
We've seen a lot of rainbows. That's become a real symbol in the UK of a kind of solidarity within this time. We've seen a lot of examples of people coming out to clap for carers. We've had some really lovely images of people communicating to their elderly relatives. And really pleasingly, we've seen a real example of the kind of British sense of humour. One couple recreated the John Lennon and Yoko Ono bed-in, but it has stay home messages behind it. So it's really good to see that even in the face of this adversity, people are still keeping their sense of humour.
Elsewhere, curators focus not only on visual display, but physical objects iconic of an unprecedented time.
Certainly a recurring object is face masks. They have become the most powerful visual symbol of the crisis. Also, they've become a political statement as well. Whether you decide to wear one or not can signal how you feel about the government's efforts to reopen. And another category that is growing is objects that are made by businesses who have pivoted their production in order to serve need during the crisis.
The New York Historical Society launched their coronavirus collection in March, starting with a single bottle of hand sanitizer. Their focus is physical artifacts of the pandemic, evidence defining a painful time that may become instructive in the future.
Look at how we are going back to the flu pandemic of 1918 for lessons learned from that experience. We look at the public health measures that were taken and the government interventions that were taken or not taken for guidance on what might be the right thing to do now.
Signage offering gloves to those who can't afford it. A playground cordoned off to keep children from gathering. Computer screens used to socialize in the age of social distancing. These are the items and images that will tell the story of our unprecedented time, shaping how the world remembers the coronavirus pandemic. Cyril Vanier, CNN.
And that's it for this evening. You can find all of our content, including everything you've just seen, on our website. cnnmoney.ch is the place. And as always, feel free to stay in touch with us via all of our social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.